I want to start with a simple question before camp officially opens, because I think it gets at everything that's happened to this franchise since January. How does a team go from a 6-month stretch of total chaos to walking into training camp with actual, legitimate hope? Because that's the story I'm about to walk you through. And even having lived through every single day of it, I'm still not totally sure how we got here. This wasn't a normal offseason for the Raiders. This was a full identity overhaul, the kind of stretch that either breaks a fan base for good or resets the whole thing from the ground up. Stick with me here, because there's a lot to unpack, and some of it still doesn't feel real. Let's go back to where this all started, because none of what's happening now makes sense without sitting in how bad things actually got first. Last season was billed as a turning point for this organization. Instead, it turned into one of the most miserable, draining stretches this fan base has endured in recent memory. And right in the middle of the wreckage was a coaching hire that, in hindsight, was doomed from the jump. Pete Carroll. I won't pretend otherwise. When that name got attached to this franchise, I let myself buy in a little. A coach with that kind of pedigree, I thought. Maybe he's the one who finally gives this team an identity after years of drifting since the Gruden era ended. But hope only carries a fan base so far when Sundays keep telling you a different story. It unraveled fast. It got uncomfortable to watch. By the time the dust settled, the dynamic between Carroll and Geno Smith had become shorthand for everything broken about this franchise. I'm not going to act like I wasn't furious watching it play out in real time, because I absolutely was. There were stretches where it genuinely felt like this organization was trapped in a loop, different coach, different quarterback, same disappointing outcome, year after year after year. But sometimes hitting the floor is exactly the thing that forces real change. And that's what ended up happening here, even if it didn't feel like a blessing while we were living through it. Carroll was out. The Geno Smith chapter ended, and as brutal as that stretch was to sit through, it's the exact reason this franchise landed at the very top of the draft order. No collapse, no number one pick. No Fernando Mendoza walking through that facility this spring. It's almost cruel how this league works sometimes. You have to burn the whole thing down before you get handed the one piece that might actually rebuild it the right way. So let's talk about that pick, because this is where the entire tone of the offseason flips. Landing Mendoza with that selection wasn't just adding a name to the roster, it was a declaration. It told the rest of the league, it told this fan base, and honestly, it told the front office itself that the era of duct taping this roster together was officially over. For years, this team has bounced from one bridge quarterback to the next, never settling, never finding the guy who could anchor this thing for the next decade. Mendoza is the first real swing at solving that problem since this front office took over. And yes, I know the instinct here. Rookie quarterbacks are a gamble, and that instinct isn't wrong. But this isn't really about whether he takes a single snap this season. It's about finally having a long-term answer sitting in the building instead of another temporary patch. That single fact changes the entire emotional tone of this offseason, even before anything else happened. Because the front office didn't stop there. Before free agency even opened its doors, this regime had already swung a trade that completely reshaped the offensive line, bringing in one of the most disruptive interior pieces in the entire league. That move alone told you everything about this new front office's mentality. They weren't interested in cosmetic fixes. They wanted to fix the trenches first, and they moved on it before anyone else even had a chance to react. Then free agency actually opened. And I'll be honest, this is where my jaw started dropping for real. Because for the first time in longer than I want to admit, this team didn't wait around for scraps after the big markets had their fun. They went out and actually signed the players this fan base has been begging for. Not one starting caliber linebacker. 2. A defense that's been searching for an identity for years suddenly had real, legitimate building blocks. Every time a new name hit my timeline that offseason, I kept asking myself the same question. Is this actually happening, or am I just dreaming this whole thing up? And then came the punch to the gut. If you were locked into Raiders Twitter during this stretch, you remember exactly where you were standing when this news dropped. Maxx Crosby, the literal heartbeat of this defense, a guy who's bled silver and black through some of the ugliest seasons this franchise has had to offer, got traded. For roughly 48 hours, this entire fan base sat in stunned silence and then full-blown rage. Real anger, real heartbreak, the kind of reaction you only get when a player has become something bigger than a roster spot, when he's become a symbol. He's supposed to retire a Raider. That's not some slogan we throw around for fun. That's genuinely how this fan base feels about him. So when word came down that he'd been moved, it felt like betrayal. It felt like the front office had ripped away the last thread of continuity we had left to hold onto from the wreckage of last season. And then, almost as fast as the news broke, it reversed. He was back. Crosby never actually left. I went through every emotion a human being can experience in that window. Fury, denial, disbelief, relief, and finally something close to joy. And I know most of this fan base rode that exact same roller coaster right alongside me. It was a brutal reminder of just how emotionally tangled up we all are in this team, for better and for worse, whether we admit it out loud or not. Once that storm passed, the front office kept right on building. More defensive depth, more pieces fitted into the puzzle with actual purpose. For the first time in a long time, this roster doesn't feel like it was assembled out of panic. It feels like it was built with intention. And that intentionality is exactly what's had me cautiously optimistic walking into this season. I want to stress the word cautiously because this fan base has been burned plenty of times before, and burned fans don't trust easily. Now let's talk about the man tasked with pulling all these new pieces together, because this might be the single biggest storyline of the entire offseason, Clint Kubiak. After a coaching search that dragged on far longer than anyone's patience could handle, this organization finally landed the coach they wanted from day one. And I'll be straight with you. Part of me wants to tread carefully here, because we've said this is the guy before about coaches who didn't pan out. Hope has burned this city plenty of times, and I'm not interested in pretending it hasn't. But here's what separates this hire from the others. Kubiak has a documented history of doing the one thing this franchise has desperately needed for years, actually developing quarterbacks. Wherever he's landed, the guy under center has taken a real step forward. We watched it happen last year with a quarterback who was practically written off heading into the season, and by the time that season ended, he looked like a completely different player. That kind of transformation isn't luck. That's scheme. That's structure. That's a coach who understands how to put his quarterback in positions to actually succeed instead of leaving him exposed. Which brings us straight to maybe the juiciest storyline heading into camp, the quarterback room itself. Because this isn't some token competition where everyone already knows the outcome. There's a veteran in that building with real starting experience at this level, and sitting right behind him is a rookie with the physical tools and the pedigree of a top overall selection. And the front office has been clear about this from the start. Whoever earns it on the field is going to play. Full stop, regardless of draft slot or paycheck. That's the kind of internal competition that breeds urgency, and it's something this franchise hasn't actually had in years. If you're asking where I land on this, and trust me, I've gone back and forth more times than I'd like to admit, I think the smart move is letting the veteran open the season as the starter. Let him absorb the early pressure. Let him handle the bumps that come with a new system, a new coaching staff, a roster still figuring out its own chemistry. Meanwhile, let the rookie sit, watch, and absorb the speed of the league from the sideline instead of getting fed to the wolves before he's ready. We've all watched what happens when a young quarterback gets rushed into the fire too early behind a roster that isn't fully built around him yet. It can stunt a career instead of launching one. This franchise gets one real shot at getting this right, and I'd rather be patient and protect the long-term value of that pick than chase a flashy storyline in week one. That doesn't mean the rookie stays glued to the bench all season no matter what. If things go sideways, the door's open. But there's no logical reason to throw him into a pressure cooker environment from day one when there's a capable veteran ready to absorb that weight while the kid develops behind the scenes, learning without the spotlight burning a hole through him. So where does all of this actually leave us heading into the season? Let's talk expectations honestly, because I think staying grounded matters here, even with everything that's shifted over the last 6 months. Outside of this fan base, nobody is circling the Raiders as a contender this year, and I understand exactly why. This is still a team in transition, still building chemistry under a brand new staff, still figuring out how all these new additions actually fit together on Sundays. Expecting a deep playoff run off one strong offseason would just be setting ourselves up for the same disappointment we felt before. But here's where I genuinely land. I think this team takes a real tangible step forward. I'm thinking somewhere around 7 or 8 wins if things click the way they're supposed to. And I know that number might sound small to outsiders, but you have to remember the road this franchise has traveled. We've talked ourselves into 7, 8, 9 wins for years, and watched this team fall short of even that modest number season after season. So actually hitting it this time would be a real measurable sign of progress, even without a playoff berth attached to it. Am I predicting a postseason run? Honestly, no. I think calling this team a legitimate playoff contender in year one of this new era is a stretch, even with everything that's changed. Maybe if the pieces click immediately, maybe if the injury bug stays away, maybe if the quarterback room provides more stability than this offense has had in years, there's a sliver of a path to a wild card spot. But I'm not banking on it, and you shouldn't either. What I am asking for, what I think this fan base has earned after the seasons we've sat through, is competitive football. Games that actually matter in November instead of being decided before Halloween. A team that fights for 60 full minutes instead of folding the second adversity shows up. Now let's get into the schedule, because there are a couple of matchups already circled hard on my calendar. The trip up north for that Bay Area rivalry game sits at the very top of my list, and honestly, it's personal. This will be my first time experiencing that atmosphere live. standing in hostile territory for one of the most heated rivalries in this entire division. There's something different about that game. The history runs deep, the resentment runs even deeper, and bragging rights matter in a way that goes far beyond the standings. I don't care what our record looks like walking into that one. I want that win more than almost anything else on this schedule. Win it, and you carry those bragging rights all the way until the next time these two teams collide. The home opener is another one I'm marking up. It feels like it's been forever since this fan base got to actually celebrate an opening day win inside our own stadium. And there's a different kind of electricity in that building when the season kicks off at home. Pair that with a rowdy road trip out to face AFC East competition, and you've got an early stretch of football that's going to tell us a whole lot about who this team actually is underneath all the offseason hype. And I can't talk about any of this without bringing up what just happened in basketball, because it's been sitting with me ever since it happened. Watching the New York Knicks finally break through and win a championship after 53 years of waiting hit me differently as a Raiders fan than I expected it to. 53 years. Sit with that number for a second. Meanwhile, this franchise has been chasing its own championship for 42 years, and every season that passes without one stings just a little more than the last. But watching that fan base finally get their moment, finally get to celebrate after generations of heartbreak, it gave me a strange, almost irrational kind of hope. It's proof that no drought lasts forever. It's proof that the wait, no matter how brutal, no matter how long, can actually end. And when it finally does, every single year of suffering ends up feeling worth it. So how long is this going to take for the Raiders? I won't pretend I have a definitive answer, and anyone who tells you they do is lying to your face. But if I had to put a number on it, I'd say give this thing 5 years to fully come together. 5 years for this young core to mature, for this coaching staff to fully install their system, for whoever ultimately wins that quarterback job to grow into a player capable of carrying a franchise on a real championship run. That would put us somewhere in the mid to late 40s on this title drought, which still sounds painfully far away when you actually say it out loud. But every real rebuild has to start somewhere, and for the first time in a long while, it genuinely feels like this organization is operating off an actual plan, instead of just hoping things sort themselves out. And here's the part that gets me the most, even after everything I've tried to temper with caution in this breakdown. The Super Bowl is coming to this city in just a couple of years. Think about that for a second. The biggest stage in this sport, landing right here in Vegas, with this young core hopefully hitting its stride at exactly the right moment. I'm not gonna lie, my mind has wandered to that scenario more than once already. The Raiders, in their own building, on the biggest stage in sports, facing that Bay Area rival in a winner-take-all moment. It's a dangerous thing to let yourself dream about, because if it ever actually happened and we came up short, this fan base would never hear the end of it. Losing a Super Bowl in your own city against your biggest rival would be almost unbearable to sit through. But honestly, I'd take that risk every single time without hesitation. I'd rather chase that dream and fall short than never get close enough to even feel the heartbreak in the first place. That's what being a fan of this team has always been about. Believing through the bad years, through the coaching carousel, through the quarterback chaos, through every gut punch loss, because somewhere down the road, all of it is supposed to lead to a moment exactly like that one. So here's where I land as camp officially gets underway. This offseason gave this fan base something it hasn't genuinely felt in years. Real optimism, not the wishful kind we've talked ourselves into before. A new coaching staff with an actual defined plan. A quarterback room with real competition and a long-term answer already waiting in the wings. A defense that finally has legitimate pieces to be disruptive instead of just hopeful. And a front office that, for once, actually went and got the players this fan base wanted, instead of settling for whatever was left on the board. Is this the year everything flips overnight? Probably not. And I think staying honest with ourselves about that matters more than ever. But for the first time in longer than I can remember, it genuinely feels like this organization is building something with a real foundation underneath it, instead of just patching the same holes year after year and hoping nobody notices. And that more than any single trade or any single draft pick is what has me truly excited walking into this training camp. We've got a long season stretched out in front of us, and I'll be right here through every twist, every gut check, every high and every low, because that's simply what we do as fans of this team.